you are collecting a lot of data. Technically, you are actually building a data lake. You have the golden signals coming from diverse set of clusters.
No one knows how to work with PromQL or any query language that has to actually query metrics. There's only like 1% of the R&D that knows how to build these dashboards, and they stay for life.
Do you have a freemium plan where I can onboard like a single node clusters or basically ingest some telemetry and play around with?
It's not even a freemium, it's a complete, fully featured free plan for life. For one Kubernetes cluster, so you can install it on any cluster at any size.
What is the future of eBPF according to you? How do you see this evolving further? Where is it headed?
Once Windows kicks into eBPF, it's going to be even more clear. We're going to see a mixture of eBPF and OpenTelemetry for a while until people...
How do you see GroundCover evolve in 2024?
As time expands in the immediate future, we're going to expand outside of Kubernetes to run the sensor on distributions and
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Encounter, where we talk to senior leaders from the tech industry to get their unique perspectives and insights. This is Janakiram, your host. Today I have Shahar Azulay, co-founder and CEO of GroundCover, a startup that's building a unique and contemporary observability platform. So I have explored GroundCover and it is very fascinating. So Shahar, welcome to Jani.tv.
Thank you, Johnny, for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So, Shahar, let me start by asking you this. How do you see the current state of observability in the tech industry? And what are the unique challenges and opportunities that you get to see, particularly from the vantage point of view at GroundCover?
So I think that, if nothing has changed in the observability domain for the past decade or so, is that it's a super critical part of the infrastructure for any company. Companies, moving into the cloud, growing in their cloud compute, dependency basically, rely heavily on observability from different aspects, both for critical monitoring, but also for troubleshooting and performance investigation, the things which are like the second tier of basically figuring out how to improve your system. So observability has and stayed like super critical. And on the other end, I think that we're seeing basically a degradation in service in what observability can provide. There's an explosion of data. People don't really know how to handle that. Vendors don't really know how to handle that. And over time, we're basically seeing, I think, less and less innovation in how to collect and treat the data, but mostly innovation in how to maybe make it cheaper, like innovations in the backend or data pipelines all the way to your SaaS vendor that basically collects your observability data, just because it kind of ease some of the pain of cost around observability. And I think that provides like a unique opportunity for companies that are looking to innovate like companies did 15 years ago, maybe like Datadog and Dynatrace and the giants of the observability domain today, which basically reinvented the entire stack, from how you collect the data to how you process the data to how you store and present the data. Nowadays, in the maybe past 5 years, we're seeing mostly innovations in how do I collect data that you have. So it's an opportunity to reinvent the entire stack if an opportunity comes along, like something that GroundCover is trying to do. But I think that there's less innovation in collecting the data and processing it more in a more modern way in the past few years. So I think that's kind of where we're entering into the market at the moment.
Right. So I have a follow-up question. I've been tracking the monitoring and then observability industry for a while. Do you think it has reached a saturation point and there is no innovation left?
No. So I think that in a sense, we see it very significantly in the data collector part. So, collecting logs, for example, that has kind of saturated over time. You have so many open source log collectors that know how to collect log in a standard way. Why reinvent that, right? You just reinvent the backend of how you store logs more efficiently, let customers work at high scales and stuff like that. It kind of happened to metrics and traces also in the past few years with open telemetry, basically kind of standardizing the way people handle traces and SDK and of collecting these traces. So companies have kind of ditched modernizing that part and say, and we're basically saying, we're going to rely on the open source motion of open telemetry. You probably have open telemetry, right? So we'll know how to digest it, process it, present it. So I think, yeah, definitely it kind of stagnated for a while in the data collector part, but eBPF, which we might talk about later in depth, I think it's a step function in capability. So that's kind of breaking right now what I see as a multi-year stagnation of how you collect data differently, with open telemetry being so prominent. Suddenly there's a whole new kind of, out of the box technology to do that, very different than what we had before. And that will drive a new wave of innovation. Because basically,
Right.
up until now, it was stuck in open source standards like OpenTelemetry that we know from the past few years already.
Right. So the conventional observability platforms predominantly focused on collecting one type of the golden signal, either traces, metrics, or logs. Each of them actually specialized in one of those in the initial days. But with GroundCover, you seem to basically build a unified platform that deals with all the four pillars of observability. So what is the advantage of using a single platform to basically ingest all these traces, metrics, logs, and events into one platform? What benefits do customers get out of this?
So I think we're in a state where the observability market is really fragmented. I mean, we usually encounter companies where they have like 4, 5, 6 different vendors that they work with, plus some open source stack inside that they self-host because they need, a few different use cases that the vendor can provide. They get flexibility, right? Because they have some best of breed kind of mix of, log management and trace management and stuff like that. But basically, they lose, the classical claim for like single pane of glass, right? So correlating data suddenly becomes like, kind of unwritten playbooks inside teams. So they, in production, they know how to access logs there. And if something doesn't look good, they go to Prometheus to look at metrics, and they kind of know how to play with it. But eventually, most of them are used to not seeing all the data in one place. I think the most kind of clear evidence of that is the hard separation in the market between log management and all the rest. And that happens, again, not because of technology. I mean, collecting logs is basically the easiest thing you can do, but because of pricing and basically the way you're going to be priced for huge volumes of logs these companies produce, that we're seeing that hard segmentation already happening. People pay Datadog plus Splunk, or they pay Neuralink plus another log vendor. And that happens because of, let's say, non-technical problems, because of pricing and pricing models and issues like that. So I think that people want to get back to one sensor that collects it all. We know these narratives weren't invented now; they were invented 15 years ago. All your logs, or your metrics, or your traces in one place. I think we're getting used to that segmentation, but the wave is to get back to it if we can. That's currently the situation in the market.
Right. So, Shahar, last time when we spoke, we discussed about eBPF, and you're actually using that as a differentiating factor for GroundCover. So,
Yeah.
tell us more about eBPF and how you are basically exploiting that to the core to get the best out of the open source technology to build the next generation observability platform.
So I think that one of the things that eBPF introduces, and it's first of all, it's super impressive to see this technology moving so fast in the past few years. Where GroundCover started about 3 years ago, it was like, we had to pitch it to teams that we were meeting, and right now they're looking for eBPF technologies to solve some of the problems. So it's moving fast and dominating networking and security and now observability. I think what eBPF brings to the table is the ability basically to collect intimate data about your application, like application metrics and traces, and basically all the intimate data you need to troubleshoot and solve hard problems in how your application behaves without being part of the application code, basically. So it's a step function on two ways. One is the technical way, right? Of should I implement an SDK compared to should I just throw a sensor in my cluster and that's it? But there's always the claim of auto instrumentation and how far OpenTelemetry or Datadog SDK or whatever can go in specific languages. And I think that's where the other aspect of eBPF comes to play, and it's basically the out of the box experience in environments like Kubernetes. Because when you look at a single Java service, right, auto instrumentation plus some manual help, you get there. But when you look at them at an average company with 150 different microservices, democratizing code language choices in their development team with like 15 different development teams, then it becomes a really organizational issue of how to even onboard an organization into OpenTelemetry. I think that eBPF completely eliminates this problem. So GroundCover uses it to collect basically all the observability data from the cluster with a single eBPF sensor. So you suddenly get to install it without talking to so many stakeholders in the R&D. One, figure in the R&D like head of DevOps, architects, people responsible for platform engineering can suddenly take control and monitor the entire organization at once with like a few minutes of installation. So I think it's a game changer, both from the data it provides, but also from onboarding a real organization into an observability platform, which is hard.
Right, right. I completely agree. But Shah, the as we discussed earlier, the observability platform, observability market landscape is highly competitive. There are established players that have been operating for almost a decade now, and they're well entrenched in the market. Of course,
Mhm.
eBPF is a differentiator, and you're actually betting on it. But when it comes to customer, why should they choose someone like GroundCover, who is based on eBPF, versus an agent-driven traditional mechanism of collecting the logs and traces? So, how does it matter to the customer, and what's in it for the customer?
So I think it's a great question, because saying that eBPF can solve all the world's problems is a false claim, because basically it's a very sophisticated, very strong way to collect data, and I can bet on it regardless of GroundCover as being the prominent method to collect data like traces and metrics for years to come. But eventually, the other part in the market besides onboarding into observability platform is the pain of trade-off between paying for all this data and covering the things you need to cover in your production. And we see companies kind of struggling with this trade-off constantly, not collecting logs from dev environments, not onboarding into traces and APM because they don't want to pay for it. So even if you put an eBPF sensor into these companies, into Datadog, into New Relic, into Dynatrace, you're going to pay premium for that. More data being pushed into the vendor, more volume-based pricing, and eventually you're going to get a premium bill on that for the end of the month. So without solving that part, it's like doing nothing and just frustrating customers even more with more data they can't pay for. So that's why GroundCover also has a very strong differentiator, which is our data architecture. So besides just building a very sophisticated eBPF sensor, we are also building what we call an in-cloud observability backend. Basically, it means that the data plane of GroundCover, even in our self-served version, runs on the customer's environment. Basically, imagine like a self-hosted observability backend, like people are used from their Elastic or Prometheus. Only we know how to deploy it, manage for them, and choose the technologies that we believe in that should run in this backend. And then once we know how to solve that with technology, a sensor collecting the data and storing it on-prem, we can also roll back the savings back to you and then say, you know what, we're not going to charge you by volume at all. No matter the retention, you're going to pay by the size of your infrastructure. And we're currently the only vendor in the market that offers that. And I think that's a game changer, enabling the access to a premium technology like eBPF, but also saying you should pay differently for it. That's what's going to challenge maybe the big guys, because these are great platforms. It's not easy to replace a Datadog or any Relic in a company. It has to be more than one punch to kind of take them on. So that's what we're trying to do.
Perfect. So I have a slightly technical question. I can understand if the ground cover eBPF sensor is being installed on Ubuntu or one of the traditional Linux operating systems, but
Mhm.
we are seeing the growth of container optimized operating systems. For example, Google has one, and then Amazon has Bottle Rocket, uh, and Azure has their own CBL Mariner Linux that they are using for AKS. So there is this new breed of Linux optimized for containers that is powering the managed Kubernetes clusters. So how do you work with those container optimized wafer thin operating systems, which are not conventional traditional Linux distributions?
So I can give you an example. The GroundCover support Battle Rocket because we encounter that a lot. But it's the right question because eventually, I think let's look at it the other way around. It's like asking an SDK, how are you going to support all the different clients, using Mongo? I think going upward in the layers, it's harder because things change much more often, like, the versions of Python and I don't know, versions of clients communicating with HTTP or anything like that. But when you go to the bottom layers, there's still change, there's still flavors, even in Kubernetes and in Linux and different kernels. So building an eBPF sensor that is stable and wide requires attention to all that. But in the grand picture, it's still these things still change much less frequently than what happens on top, where the SDK has to kind of cope. So yeah, we do have to test and make sure that our sensor works in BottleRocket and different distributions. Also test it for any managed Kubernetes distribution to make sure that we get the access that we need to say use the Kubernetes API or kind of build the entire experience. It's not just the sensor, but again, it's like I say 10x less movement than what happens in the code layers of the application or user space itself. So we're testing it. We're making sure that we address it when customers want to onboard into new platforms that we haven't encountered. But basically, it's still feasible. And I think that any eBPF sensor would have to do that.
Right. So, as one of the pioneers in eBPF-based observability, what is the future of eBPF according to you? How do you see this evolving further? Where is it headed?
So I think eBPF right now is already kind of substantiated its stand in security. All the security sensors are moving to be used on eBPF, and I think it's going to be completely obsolete to use kernel modules in security very soon. Um, Once Windows kicks into eBPF, it's going to be even more clear. For observability, I think that we're going to see a mixture of eBPF and OpenTelemetry for a while until people get the entire picture that they need, which is distributed tracing on one hand that they work for, that is maybe more descriptive of their business. You want to instrument specific parts of your code that it maybe aren't even auto instrumented, and eBPF, which is like a wide coverage, covering everything, never losing something. So kind of combining that will be the immediate future of eBPF. I think that for the longer run, we're going to see research, and we're already seeing that in initial sensors that are popping up in the open source domain of basically getting to the holy grail of doing distributed tracing with eBPF and basically tracking runtime like Node.js and Python and Go for distributed trace without necessarily injecting a trace ID and using different methods to do that. But once we get there, I think that's going to be the beginning of the adoption of eBPF in full, and basically saying we can even reach open telemetry standards in companies out of the box, and that's where I think it's going to kick in really heavily, even with more legacy parts of the market and stuff like that. So that's how I see it in stages. It's
Awesome.
currently maybe more further down the line, but that's where it's getting.
Awesome. So, Shahar, tell us about how developers can get started or how ops teams can use GroundCover. Do you have a freemium plan where I can onboard like a single node clusters or basically ingest some telemetry and play around with?
Yeah. So once you go into groundcover.com, you will see a way to just click in directly into our free plan. It's not even a freemium, it's a complete, fully featured free plan for life for one Kubernetes cluster. So you can install it on any cluster at any size. Installation takes a minute. We have a lot of different ways to install the sensor. Try it out. I think it's super interesting to see how these sensors collect data so fast. And yeah, it's definitely the best way to get started, just on a cluster in your environment to test it out.
Awesome. So finally, as the co-founder and CEO of the company, what is the roadmap? What is the plan going forward in terms of market expansion, your investments, and how do you see GroundCover evolve in 2024?
So GroundCover right now, our bread and butter is Kubernetes. We're heavily invested in Kubernetes observability, and I think we're aiming to be a very significant or clear vendor for APM in the Kubernetes market. As time expands in the immediate future, we're going to expand outside of Kubernetes around the sensor on distributions and on kind of managed platforms like ECS, and then later on like VMs and just making sure that you can aggregate data all across your stack. GroundCover is also going to invest a lot in integrations from data from other sources where eBPF can't run, like Lambdas and managed services and things like that, to kind of give you the full experience. And we're going to expand our capabilities to areas that are so easy to do with eBPF, like features on the border of security and observability, which is a fine line, right? So that's coming up pretty soon for GroundCover.
Awesome. Well, I said that was the final question, but I have a follow-up question to you. And this is something that I ask all my guests. So you are collecting a lot of data. Technically, you're actually building a data lake because you have the golden signals coming from diverse set of clusters. So with the rise of LLMs and Gen AI, do you see this being channelized to building something like an AIOps platform on top of GroundCover?
So GroundCover currently sees LLMs as something that we would use to query the data more than to alert on the data or things like that. I think that it's a very primitive but yet so clear gap in the market where people, for example, don't know how to build dashboards. No one knows how to work with PromQL or any query language that has to actually query metrics or logs or things like that. And there's only like 1% of the R&D that knows how to build these dashboards, and they stay for life. And once GroundCover starts to collect so much data at the same time, that gap becomes a problem that we want to solve with AI and kind of help you build dashboards, query data, easily integrate between kind of human interface to data being stored on schemas in the DB very quickly. So that is something that we're going to do very fast. And I think that learning from how customers use this data, what do they want to query, it's kind of propelling us pretty quickly to that. But yeah, I totally believe in that, at least in those areas where these gaps are super clear.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining the encounter. It's been a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to having a follow-up with you when GroundCover grows bigger and you start to innovate more and more on eBPF. Thanks, and have a great year ahead.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you for having me.